The chocolate cake in Robert Hayes's trembling hands tilted as he reached for the back door. 31 candles waited in the kitchen drawer, but he wanted to surprise his son first. Under his arm, a small velvet box pressed against his ribs inside a gold watch that had ticked through 3 generations. His father's voice echoed in his head. A man's time is the only thing he can't buy back. Through the glass, late afternoon light spilled across the patio. Laughter rose from the yard, the loose, careless kind that never imagined it was being overheard. Robert's heart softened for a second. It had been a long time since the house sounded young. Then he heard Ethan's voice. "Man, your dad really went all out," someone said. Ethan laughed, the sound sharp enough to chip glass. "Yeah, well, he's trying to buy my affection again. Thinks money fixes everything." The air thickened. Robert's fingers tightened on the plate until the cardboard bowed. Then came the line that cleaved the day in half. "The best gift he could give me," Ethan said, "is to disappear from my life forever." Silence pressed against the glass. Robert's reflection looked back at him, jaw, locked eyes, wet but dry-looking under the kitchen light. He stepped back from the door. The cake wobbled once before he steadied it. He placed it on the counter beside the unopened box, the frosting spelling, "Happy Birthday, Ethan," like a joke that had run out of laughter. He didn't go outside. He went upstairs instead, each step a slow unlearning of habit. From the bedroom window, he watched the party move, his son's gestures bold under the fading sky. An hour later, red and blue lights washed the yard. Officers stepped out, hands on radios. Ethan froze mid-sentence as they closed in. From the doorway, Robert's silhouette framed the scene. "You wanted me gone, son," quietly. "Consider it done. Would you have stayed or walked away?" The morning after the party, the house felt hollow, the kind of quiet that follows a storm but refuses to promise peace. Beer bottles lined the railing like an audience that had forgotten to leave. The smell of smoke still lingered in the curtains. Robert Hayes stood at the sliding door watching the empty deck where voices had filled the night before. The cake sat untouched on the counter, its frosting sagging under the weight of hours. The velvet box lay beside it, open now, the watch glinting in a thin ray of early sunlight. Robert picked it up, turned it over in his hand, and whispered to no one. Still ticking. He washed the dishes one by one, not because they needed it, but because it was something to do that didn't require thought. The hum of the refrigerator became the only sound in the room. He'd always hated silence. Now it felt honest. Robert had built this house 35 years ago, every nail driven by his own hands. Back then it had been a promise to his wife Linda and the family they planned to grow inside it. After she passed 10 years ago, he'd told himself that keeping the house spotless was a way of keeping her alive. Ethan had been 19 then, angry, untethered, and suddenly without the person who had understood him best. Robert had filled that gap with money, comfort, and the kind of forgiveness that disguised itself as love. He'd paid Ethan's tuition, his parking tickets, his credit card debt, his emergency loans. He'd bailed him out once after a bar fight that never made it to court. And through it all, he'd told himself that this was what fathers did, they stayed. But staying had turned into enabling. Ethan was 29 now. No steady job, no rent, no bills. He lived in the upstairs guest room as if it were still his teenage den. Tara, his girlfriend, came and went as she pleased, her perfume and laughter marking territory in a house she didn't own. She'd once told Robert at breakfast, "You're lucky Ethan's so kind. Some kids would have left already." Robert had smiled politely. He'd learned long ago that silence protected more dignity than honesty ever could. Now, looking at the remnants of last night, the half-burned candles, the empty beer cans, silence no longer felt like dignity. It felt like decay. He sat at the table, fingers interlaced, eyes tracing the scratches in the wood. Linda had chosen that table. She'd said oak lasts forever if you treat it right. He wondered if that was true for people. Outside, a bird hopped along the railing, pecking at a crumb. Beyond it, the deck stretched into sunlight. Robert could still hear the echo of Ethan's laughter from the night before. The words replayed themselves. "The best gift he could give me is to disappear." He didn't feel anger, not exactly. Anger was loud, and this was quiet. Something colder, clearer, like a gear finally locking into place. At noon, Ethan came downstairs, rubbing sleep from his eyes. His hair was messy, his breath sour. "Morning," he mumbled, opening the fridge. Any coffee left? Robert didn't answer right away. He poured the coffee black and set it on the counter. Ethan grabbed it without thanks. "Rough night?" Robert asked. Ethan shrugged. "We were celebrating. It was my birthday." Robert nodded slowly. "I remember." There was an edge of sarcasm Ethan didn't catch. "You should have joined us, Dad. Might have loosened you up." "I didn't feel invited," Robert said. Ethan snorted. "You didn't have to be invited. It's your house. For now." The words hung there. For now. Robert studied his son, the man he'd raised, and the boy who never left. The resemblance was cruel. Same eyes, same chin, but none of the steadiness. "I'd like to talk," Robert said. Ethan glanced at his phone. "Make it quick. Tara's picking me up soon." "Outside," Robert said, motioning toward the deck. Ethan sighed. "Whatever you need to say it here. Everyone heard enough lectures last night." Robert's jaw tightened. "You mean everyone heard you?" Ethan looked up, a flicker of guilt swallowed by bravado. "You were listening. I was home," Robert said evenly. "It's hard not to hear someone wish you didn't exist." Ethan laughed, but it was hollow. "Dad, I was drunk. You take everything so literally. Maybe I should have taken things literally sooner." Tara appeared at the back door, car keys twirling in her hand. "You ready?" she called. "Almost." Ethan turned back to Robert. "Look, you're overreacting." "I didn't mean it." Robert didn't move. "Then say what you meant." Ethan blinked, thrown off balance. "I meant—" He looked to Tara for rescue. She shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe that we both need space." Robert nodded once. "You'll get it." Something in his tone made Ethan pause. What's that supposed to mean? Robert didn't answer. He just walked past him through the sliding door into the house. The conversation ended itself. That night, after the sun slipped behind the San Diego hills, Robert sat in his small office at the end of the hall. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old books. He opened the top drawer of his desk, the one Linda used to call the drawer of responsibilities. Inside were the papers that had defined his adult life: mortgage documents, the house deed, insurance policies, bank statements. He spread them out on the desk, each page a brick in the wall that had once protected his family. He reached for the watch box, placed it beside the papers, and stared at both the timepiece and the life it measured. He wound the crown once just to hear the tick. Upstairs, Ethan's laughter filtered through the floorboards. A movie played in his room, the same rhythm of immaturity. Robert exhaled long and controlled. "Be careful what you wish for," he whispered, not in anger, but in acknowledgement. He turned off the desk lamp, leaving the papers in neat stacks. Through the window, the neighborhood glowed in suburban stillness. Manicured lawns, porch lights, the illusion of control. He stood there until his reflection disappeared into the glass. Then slowly he said aloud, as if signing a contract with himself, "By morning, I'll know exactly what to do." The clock on the wall answered him, one soft, deliberate tick at a time. The night settled deep and quiet, the kind that turns every sound into confession. In his office, Robert sat alone, the glow of a single desk lamp carving out a small island of light around him. The papers from earlier were stacked neatly to one side. In front of him lay the watch gold casing, dulled by years, the leather strap warm from his touch. He lifted it carefully, thumb tracing the worn edge of the glass. The steady tick filled the silence like a heartbeat too honest to hide. It pulled him backward decades, maybe more, to a workshop that always smelled of oil and sawdust. He was 8 again, perched on a wooden stool while his father bent over a cluttered workbench. The man's hands were large and patient, coaxing life back into a rusted gear. "You can lose money and find it again," his father had said without looking up. "But lose time, and it's gone for good." Robert remembered nodding solemnly, pretending he understood. He hadn't then. He thought time was endless, long summers, long days, the world waiting politely for him to catch up. Years later, when his father gave him that very watch on his wedding day, Robert had promised to spend it on what matters. And for a while, he did. He remembered Linda, the way she laughed when they were building the house together, drywall dust in her hair, sunlight bouncing off the new kitchen tiles. They'd built it room by room, paycheck by paycheck. Back then, every nail meant something. Every corner had a story. Then, Ethan arrived, all noise and miracle. Robert had been terrified at first, a man who built things for a living, suddenly entrusted with something he couldn't fix with tools. But Linda made it look easy. She had the kind of patience that made every mistake look like a lesson. When Ethan was 5, he'd taken the watch from Robert's dresser and dropped it on the tile. The crystal cracked. Robert had scolded him too harshly, and the boy had cried for an hour. That night, Linda placed the watch in Robert's palm and said, "He's just learning what lasts." Robert never forgot that line. The years blurred together: schoolwork, late-night dinners, birthdays that came and went with the rhythm of a steady clock. Then, one winter morning, Linda didn't wake up. The doctor called it cancer, quick and cruel. Ethan was 19, old enough to hate the world, but too young to understand what it takes to keep living in it. Robert remembered the look on his son's face at the funeral, blank distant, a boy already halfway out the door of grief. After that, Robert stopped talking much. Words felt dangerous. Every time he tried to comfort Ethan, it came out wrong, too stern, too practical. So he did the one thing he knew how to do: he provided. He paid the bills, the tuition, the fines, the rent. Ethan refused to pay himself. He handed over his savings like apologies, hoping one of them might stick. When Ethan dropped out of college, Robert told himself it was temporary. When Ethan crashed his car, Robert told himself it was bad luck. When Ethan lost another job, Robert said nothing at all. Silence was easier than admitting that his generosity had become permission. Now, staring at the watch, he saw it differently. Each tick was a debt, one he'd owed himself but kept paying to his son instead. He leaned back in the chair, eyes on the ceiling. "Dad," he whispered, "I think I finally understand." Maybe his father hadn't given him a watch to mark the hours. Maybe it had been a warning that time only moves forward when you let go. Robert placed the watch on the desk, the tick steady, merciless kind. Outside, the wind brushed the window, carrying the faint sound of distant traffic. Upstairs, Ethan's laughter rose once, then faded. Robert closed his eyes. For the first time in years, memory didn't feel like punishment. It felt like instruction. The watch kept time. He finally listened. The night the police took Ethan away, the air outside still smelled of grilled meat and cheap beer. Red and blue lights bled across the siding of the house Robert had built with his own hands. The neighbors watched from their windows, polite, silent witnesses to someone else's family breaking apart. Ethan's voice carried down the driveway. "This is my house," he shouted as the officers cuffed him. "You can't just throw me out." Robert stood on the porch, his hands in his pockets. "It's mine," he said softly, though the wind nearly took the words. When the squad car door shut, he didn't move. He stayed there until the sirens faded into the distance, until even the echo stopped pretending it cared. Inside, the deck lights still glowed. Plastic cups tipped chairs, ashes cooling on the grill, the ruins of celebration. Robert switched off the string lights one by one, each click another subtraction. He poured the beer down the sink, stacked the dirty plates, and placed the untouched cake back into the fridge. The watch sat on the counter beside a folded napkin, gleaming faintly. He stared at it. For 30 years, everything in this house had been for Ethan. Every repair, every grocery run, every silent apology baked into casseroles and tuition checks. It had all been about keeping the peace, about pretending peace still existed. Now there was nothing left to keep. By morning, Robert had slept 2 hours at most. The house felt wrong in daylight, too open, too revealing. He made coffee black and wrote a list on a legal pad, the way engineers solve problems. Step 1, sell the house. Step 2, cut off every joint account. Step 3, leave no forwarding address. He underlined the last one twice. When he called Julia Perez, his voice was calm, professional. "I need to sell my property," he said. She asked the usual questions: square footage, updates, timeline. "Within a week," Robert said. There was a pause. "Mr. Hayes, that's ambitious." "I'm not looking for ambitious. I'm looking for done." Her tone changed. "Cash buyers only?" "Yes, and if we close in 7 days, there's a $5,000 bonus in it for you." Julia whistled low. "You must really want out." "I'm not running," he said, "just reallocating my time." When he hung up, he looked around the kitchen. The spotless counters, the oak cabinets. Linda had chosen the faint grease marks on the stove from hundreds of dinners that were supposed to mean family. He'd kept everything too clean, as if order could stand in for love. He opened the utility drawer, pulled out a trash bag, and began clearing. The sound of plastic crinkling was sharp and oddly satisfying. Each toss was a decision: old birthday cards, half-dead plants, the stack of pizza menus Ethan never used because he always ordered delivery through an app. At noon, Julia arrived. She was younger than he expected, maybe mid-30s, efficient eyes and a phone that never left her hand. She walked through the house, snapping photos, murmuring compliments. "You've taken excellent care of this place," she said. Robert nodded. "I was planning for permanence. Mind if I ask why you're selling?" He thought for a moment. "Time," he said simply, "and the need to stop wasting it." Julia looked at him the way people look at someone trying to outrun ghosts. Understood. She handed him a preliminary agreement. He signed without reading every line, a small act of rebellion against the meticulous man he used to be. That evening the house felt smaller. The rooms he had once considered full of life now looked like museum exhibits. He wandered from room to room, touching the walls, tracing faint pencil marks on the hallway, Ethan's growth chart from ages 7 to 12. Linda had insisted on marking every inch. He remembered the day Ethan passed 5 feet tall, arms thrown up in triumph. "Almost a man," he'd shouted. Almost. Robert stood there for a long time, fingers resting on that final line. Then he went upstairs and opened Ethan's door. The room was chaos: clothes, cables, game controllers, empty bottles. He opened the window to let the air change. On the desk sat a framed photo of Linda and Ethan at the beach. Ethan was 10, holding a plastic shovel. Linda's hair blew across her smile. Robert had taken that photo. He set the frame face down. By nightfall, he'd packed 3 suitcases, clothes, papers, tools. He moved through the motions like a man on autopilot, guided not by anger, but by precision. For the first time in years, his hands didn't shake. At dinner, he reheated the roast from 2 nights ago. Ate in silence. No television, no phone, just the sound of the fork against the plate and the refrigerator hum. When the phone rang, he expected Julia. Instead, it was the police station. A calm voice informed him that Ethan had been processed for the night, minor charges, likely 2 weeks in county. "You can check for visitation after 48 hours, the officer said. "Thank you," Robert replied. He hung up and wrote another line beneath his list. Step 4. Make it mean something. He went upstairs and took the watch from the nightstand, sat on the edge of the bed, wound it once and listened. The tick was slow, but certain. He looked toward the ceiling, whispering, "You always said, Dad, clarity is kinder than comfort. Guess we'll find out." Downstairs, the living room lights burned softly against the gathering dark. He'd already unplugged the speakers Ethan loved, coiled the wires, labeled the box. He stood there a moment longer, hands at his sides, before turning off the lights. Through the window, the house across the street shimmered in the sodium glow of the street lamp, the world carrying on undisturbed. Robert exhaled. "By this time next week," he said, "I'll be gone." The words didn't sound like grief. They sounded like relief, finally learning how to breathe. 2 days later, Robert stood at the counter of the San Diego County Jail. The air smelled like disinfectant and hopelessness. A woman behind bulletproof glass flipped through a ledger. "Name, Ethan Hayes," he said. She found the record and glanced up. 14 days. Release at 9 a.m. on the 14th. Robert nodded. "Thank you." He didn't visit. There was nothing left to say. 14 days, 2 full weeks of silence was exactly the space he needed. Back home, Julia Perez called with news. "We have a cash offer," she said. "Full asking price, no contingencies. The buyers are a couple, Carlos and Elena Martinez. 2 kids, both under 10. They love the place. How soon can we close? 5 days. Robert smiled faintly. "Perfect." He signed the documents that afternoon at the same dining table where he had once planned family dinners. The pen glided easily, like the decision had been waiting for years. When it was done, Julia shook his hand. "You're a man of your word," she said. "I try to be," he replied, "when I have the right words." That night, the house felt different, not empty but lighter. The walls seemed to exhale. He spent the next days methodically packing. No boxes labeled kitchen or bedroom, just 3 suitcases, clothes, papers, tools. Everything else could stay. On the 4th day, the Martinez family arrived with a moving truck. Carlos, stocky and kind-eyed, extended a hand. "You must be Mr. Hayes. Thank you for leaving the place in such good shape." Robert nodded. "It's a good house. Treat it well." Elena smiled, holding a bouquet of white daisies. "We will. You built it with love. You can feel it in the walls." He handed her an envelope. "If a man named Ethan shows up here, give him this." "Of course," she said without hesitation. That was all. When the paperwork was done, Robert wheeled his suitcases across the lawn to Henry Walker's house next door. Henry opened the door before Robert could knock twice. "Need a room?" "Just for a few days," Robert said. Henry stepped aside. "You know where everything is." The guest room upstairs smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. From its window, Robert had a perfect view of his old driveway. He sat there the first night watching the porch light glow on someone else's house. It didn't hurt as much as he'd imagined. It just felt factual, like a number on a page balancing itself out. When dawn came, he brewed coffee and made another list. Though this one had only one line. Watch what happens next. On the morning of Ethan's release, Robert woke early. The sky was pale gray, the kind of quiet that comes before reckoning. He sat by the window, the mug warm in his hand. At 9:12 a.m., Ethan appeared at the corner. Same denim jacket, same swagger, but slower this time, like the world had stopped clapping for him. He walked up the driveway, frowning at the unfamiliar car in front. From Henry's window, Robert watched him knock on the door. Elena answered. She smiled politely, then hesitated. Robert couldn't hear the words, but he saw the exchange confusion turning to realization. Realization? To disbelief. Ethan stepped back, holding the envelope she'd given him. His shoulders slumped as he tore it open. He read the note once, then again. Robert knew every word by heart. "You said the best gift I could give you was to disappear. I'm granting that wish. The house is sold. I'll be unreachable. Enjoy the independence you wanted. Dad." Ethan sank onto the porch step, the letter hanging loosely from his hand. The new family gave him space. Carlos stood near the doorway, protective but not unkind. From his window, Robert felt no triumph. Only the ache of inevitability. Ethan rubbed his face, then folded the letter carefully as if delaying what came next might undo it. Finally he stood, glanced once more at the door that used to be his, and walked down the driveway. Robert stayed at the window until Ethan disappeared around the corner. Later that day, Henry knocked on the guest room door holding 2 mugs of coffee. He came by. Robert nodded. He read the letter. Henry exhaled through his nose. "How'd it go?" "He left walking," Robert said. "That's something." Henry handed him the second mug. "You think he'll come looking for you eventually," Robert said, "but he won't find what he expects." They sat in silence, 2 men sharing coffee and the kind of peace that comes only after chaos has burned itself out. That night, Robert stepped outside. The air smelled of jasmine and damp earth. Across the yard, the Martinez kids were chasing each other with flashlights, laughter cutting through the dark. It was the same yard, but it sounded different now, lighter, truer. He looked up at his old bedroom window, now glowing with warm light, and felt something unfamiliar closure without applause. He went back inside, poured himself a glass of water, and sat by the window again. The watch ticked softly on the table beside him. "Justice or mercy," he murmured. "I guess it depends on who's telling the story." For the first time in years, he slept without waiting for footsteps in the hall. The first night after Ethan's arrest, Robert couldn't sleep. The silence inside the house was too big, as if it had swallowed every echo of his son's voice and left only guilt behind. He sat in the living room until dawn, the lamp still burning, a cup of untouched coffee cooling beside him. He tried to picture Ethan in a holding cell, angry, pacing, blaming the world. That image hurt, but not as much as knowing that maybe this was the only way his son would ever stop. By the second morning, the guilt began to twist itself into something else: purpose. Robert realized that letting Ethan hit bottom wasn't cruelty. It was gravity. The only force strong enough to pull a man back to himself. He drove to the jail, once parking across the street, watching the high concrete walls through the windshield. He didn't go in. He only whispered, "You said disappear. I'm trying." The next day, he started sorting Linda's old things, the photo albums, the letters, the small china bird she had kept by the window. He found a postcard Ethan had made in kindergarten. "To Dad, when I grow up, I'll build houses too." The crayon lines were crooked and bright. Robert held it a long time before sliding it into his pocket. When Julia called with the first offer, he almost said no, out of habit, out of fear that selling the house meant erasing her. But then he looked at the walls, how neat they were, how untouched. They looked less like memories and more like a museum. He signed anyway. As the days passed, boxes stacked higher. The echo of footsteps changed. Where once Ethan had stomped down the stairs, now the only sound was the scrape of cardboard, the whisper of tape. Julia stopped by with updates, cheerful and professional. "The buyers seem like good people," she said. "They've got 2 kids. The girl wants to paint her room yellow." Robert smiled faintly. Yellow's a good color for starting over. He spent one evening alone in the master bedroom. The smell of Linda's perfume still lingered faintly in the closet, though he hadn't opened it in years. He sat on the bed, staring at the empty dresser, and whispered, "I hope you'd understand this." Outside, the world kept moving, sprinklers clicking, dogs barking, the faint hum of life that didn't wait for anyone's approval. On the 12th day, a storm hit San Diego. Rain battered the windows, streaking the glass until the outside world blurred. Robert stood at the kitchen counter, the watch ticking steadily beside him. For the first time, he didn't flinch at the sound. He welcomed it. Every tick said, "Keep going." The morning of the 14th day, he woke before dawn, dressed neatly, and packed the last of his things. The deed had been transferred, the payment wired, the house officially no longer his. He walked through it one final time, room by room. The hallway felt longer now, the air cooler. When he reached Ethan's door, he stopped. The room was stripped bare except for one thing, the photo he'd turned face down days ago. He picked it up, wiped the dust from the glass, and set it upright again. "I built this for you," he said quietly. "Maybe one day you'll build something for someone else." Then he locked the door and dropped the key into an envelope labeled Martinez family. He left it on the counter beside another envelope, smaller, addressed simply Ethan. When Ethan returned 2 days later, Robert was already settled in Henry's guest room. The old man's house smelled of wood polish and rain. From the window, Robert had a direct view of his former driveway. At exactly 9:17 a.m., a cab pulled up. Ethan stepped out, duffel bag slung over his shoulder, face drawn and thin. He hesitated before walking to the door, like someone approaching a memory they weren't sure still belonged to them. Robert's hands tightened on the windowsill. He wanted to run out to tell him that it wasn't too late, that everything could still be rebuilt. But he stayed still. Elena answered the door. Her expression was kind but cautious. She disappeared briefly, then returned with the envelope. From this distance, Robert could see the confusion on Ethan's face, the hesitation, the dawning horror as realization took hold. The house behind him was no longer his. The world had shifted while he was gone. Ethan unfolded the letter, his shoulders stiffening, then slowly sinking. The paper trembled in his hands, the ink glinting in the sunlight. He looked around once as if expecting to see his father somewhere. And in a way he did. Robert was there, watching, unseen but present in every brick, every wall, every lesson too late to be spoken. Ethan sat down on the curb, the letter pressed to his knees. He stayed like that for several minutes, unmoving. Then, with a kind of reluctant grace, he folded it carefully, slid it into his jacket, and walked away. Robert exhaled, his breath fogging the window. The watch on his wrist ticked in perfect time with his pulse. "He'll understand," he murmured. "Maybe not today, but he will." Henry entered quietly behind him. "You okay?" Robert nodded. "Better than I've been in years." Henry joined him at the window. Together they watched as the sun broke through the clouds and spilled across the lawn. Sometimes redemption didn't arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it came disguised as distance. Morning sunlight filtered through the thin curtains of Henry Walker's guest room. The house was quiet except for the slow rhythm of a wall clock. Steady, honest, unbothered. Robert Hayes sat on the edge of the bed, watching dust drift through the light. It wasn't the silence of loneliness anymore. It was the kind that told him everything loud had finally stopped. He brewed coffee the way Henry liked it, strong, no sugar. They drank in the kitchen side by side, but saying little. Henry was the kind of man who didn't fill space with noise. "You don't look angry anymore," Henry said, finally stirring his mug. Robert smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what happens when you stop carrying someone else's life." Henry grunted his approval. "Not everyone figures that out before it's too late." Robert didn't answer. He didn't need to. The days began to fall into rhythm. He woke early, read the newspaper cover to cover, took slow walks around the neighborhood. Sometimes he passed his old house, now painted a lighter shade of cream. Elena's flowers lined the porch, and laughter spilled from the backyard, where the Martinez kids played tag. Each time he saw it, something unclenched in his chest. The house hadn't been destroyed. It had been renewed. One afternoon as he walked by, Carlos was painting the fence with his son. The boy's brushstrokes were messy bright with too much paint. "Slow down," Carlos said gently, "or it'll drip." The boy nodded and tried again. Robert paused unseen on the sidewalk and smiled. The lesson echoed from years ago, the same patience Linda had used when Ethan cracked the watch glass as a child. The cycle, it seemed, had found a better loop. Back at Henry's, Robert wrote in a notebook. Not a letter, not really. More like a conversation with the air. "Ethan, I didn't do this to punish you. I did it because I ran out of ways to keep pretending. I used to think a father's job was to make life easier for his son. But all I did was teach you that consequences can be delayed if someone loves you enough to pay for them. Love doesn't mean cleaning up after someone's storm. Your mother said that once. I didn't understand it then. I do now." He set down the pen and stared at the page until the ink dried. Later that evening, Henry found him still at the table, writing something, a note to someone who'll never read it. Robert said. Henry poured him another coffee. "Sometimes that's the best kind." Robert chuckled. "She used to say that too, your wife." He nodded. Linda had more grace in her silence than most people have in their words. The old man leaned back. "She'd be proud you're still trying." Robert looked down at the watch on his wrist. "I think she'd tell me to stop trying and start living." Henry raised his mug. "Then start." That night, Robert lay in bed listening to the steady tick of the clock. For the first time, it didn't sound like something measuring what he'd lost. It sounded like something still offering him time. He spent the following mornings tending Henry's small garden, pruning, replanting. There was comfort in dirt, in the simplicity of things that grew when treated right. One morning, he unearthed a rusted nail and held it to the sun. The small metal piece shimmered like a relic from another life, proof that even the buried had stories left to tell. He found himself writing more in that notebook. Observations, reflections, fragments of truth that had taken him a lifetime to learn. Forgiveness doesn't need witnesses. Boundaries are a form of love. Clarity is kinder than comfort. Each line lightened him, as if the act of writing returned minutes to the clock he thought he'd already spent. One rainy evening, Henry called from the living room. "Movie night." Robert smiled. "If it's not another cop show, it's not." Henry said, grinning. "It's about two old fools who drive across the country and learn to stop complaining." Robert laughed. "Sounds dangerously autobiographical." They watched half of it before Henry fell asleep in his chair. Robert muted the screen and listened to the rain tapping the window. It was a good kind of quiet, the kind that didn't demand anything. He thought of Ethan, then wondered where he was sleeping, whether he'd found work, whether the silence had finally forced him to listen to himself. The thought didn't sting. It simply existed. He took the watch off his wrist and set it on the table. The ticking filled the room, precise and calm. He whispered, "If he ever learns to keep time with his own hands, maybe he'll find me again." Outside, thunder rolled faintly. The smell of wet earth drifted in through the open window. Before bed, Robert opened his notebook again and wrote one final line for the night. Maybe one day, Ethan will understand that losing the house wasn't punishment. It was the rent he owed to growing up. He closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, and lay back. The watch ticked in the dark, patient as ever. Would you forgive someone only after they've fallen or before they stand again? The phone rang just after sunrise, slicing through the soft hum of the kettle. Robert almost didn't answer. Most calls at his age were reminders, appointments, or wrong numbers. But something in the rhythm made him pick up. "Dad?" He froze. It had been months since he'd heard Ethan's voice. It sounded quieter, stripped of bravado. "I'm not calling to fight," Ethan said. I'd like to see you. No arguments, just to talk." Robert leaned against the counter, the warmth of the mug seeping into his hand. For a long moment, neither spoke. Where Robert finally asked, "There's a park by the beach in Carmel, the one Mom used to take me to." Tomorrow morning, Robert looked out the window. The sea was 2 hours away, but it felt closer than ever. "All right," he said softly. "Tomorrow." The next morning, Carmel by the sea was awash in gold. Early sun glazed the ocean, and the breeze carried salt and memory. Robert sat on a bench overlooking the waves, the velvet watchbox resting beside him. He didn't have to wait long. Ethan appeared at the edge of the path, not alone. A small boy ran ahead of him, chasing a gull with determined laughter. Robert's breath caught. "His name's Noah Ethan," said when they reached the bench. "He's 6. Tara and I, well, we didn't make it, but we both love him." The boy stopped, curious eyes darting between the two men. "Grandpa?" he asked shyly. Robert smiled. "I guess that's what they call me." Noah grinned and ran off toward the playground. For a few seconds, father and son simply watched him, two silhouettes stitched together by the same blood and years of silence. Ethan was the first to speak. "I've been working," he said. "Small mechanic shop near Oceanside. Nothing fancy, but the boss is patient." Robert nodded. "Good work, honest work." Ethan's voice carried no defense, no pride, only truth. "It's funny. The first thing I had to learn was how to show up on time. I used to think time was just something that happened to me. Now I know it's something I owe." Robert turned to look at him. The arrogance that once filled every word was gone. There was still youth in Ethan's face, but it was tempered now, like metal shaped by fire. "I thought you were punishing me," Ethan said quietly. "When I saw the letter, when the house was gone, I hated you. But after a while I realized you were giving me back something I'd been wasting." Robert said nothing. The ocean answered for him, waves breathing in and out like forgiveness itself. "I'm not asking to move back." Ethan went on. "I just wanted to tell you I get it now. You were right, about everything." Robert's eyes softened. "I wasn't right. I was desperate." Ethan laughed, one small broken sound. "Still feels like wisdom to me." Robert reached into his coat pocket and took out the velvet box. He held it for a moment, feeling the weight of generations in his palm, then offered it not to Ethan, but to Noah, who had just returned breathless from the playground. "This is for you," Robert said. The boy's eyes widened. "For me?" "Not yet," Robert said gently. "Someday, when you understand what it means to earn a minute." Noah nodded solemnly, the way children do when they sense something bigger than toys. Ethan swallowed hard, blinking fast. "He doesn't have to carry my mistakes," Ethan said. "No," Robert replied, "but he'll need to know where they came from." The two men sat in silence. The waves whispered and retreated, returning again and again, the sound of apology rehearsed by nature itself. After a while, Ethan spoke again. "I'm sorry, Dad, for everything I said, for everything I didn't do." Robert looked at him, really looked. "Thank you," he said. "I accept." He didn't add, "I forgive you." Some words worked better in silence. They sat there until the sun climbed higher, warming their faces. Noah wandered along the shore, collecting shells in his small hands. Robert watched him, remembering another boy who once cracked a watch and cried over it. Time, it seemed, had finally mended something he couldn't. Ethan glanced sideways. "You staying here long?" maybe, Robert said. "I like the quiet." "There's a workshop nearby looking for part-time help," Ethan offered. "If you ever get bored of being retired." Robert chuckled. "You offering me a job now?" Ethan smiled. "Maybe we could both learn how to show up on time." The wind carried their laughter out over the water, not loud, but enough. When it was time to leave, Noah ran up to hug Robert's leg. "Bye, Grandpa. I'll keep it safe." "I know you will," Robert said. Ethan extended a hand. Robert took it firm, deliberate. The same hand that once slammed doors now met his halfway. "Take care of him," Robert said. "I will." Ethan hesitated. "Take care of yourself, too." Robert smiled. "I finally am." They parted at the edge of the parking lot, the ocean still glittering behind them. That night, back at Henry's house, Robert opened his notebook and wrote, "Sometimes the only way to teach time's worth is to stop giving it away." He set down the pen, wound the watch one last time, and listened. The steady ticking blended with the faint sound of waves breaking far away, the pulse of everything that had survived. 2 weeks passed after the meeting at Carmel. The days settled into quiet, routine coffee with Henry, short walks, letters that never needed answers. Robert's body tired faster now, but his mind had never been clearer. The peace he felt was not the absence of noise. It was the absence of confusion. One afternoon, while sorting through mail, he found an envelope without a return address. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. "Across the front for you." He sat at the kitchen table, sunlight spilling over the wood, and opened it carefully. Inside were three things. First, a folded check $500 made out to Noah Hayes' education fund. Second, a notarized document Ethan Hayes had officially renounced any claim to Robert Hayes' estate. Signed, witnessed, and sealed. And third, a single slip of paper torn from a notebook written in Ethan's hand. "You already gave me what I needed. I just didn't know how to thank you." Robert read it twice, the words simple but heavy, as if they'd traveled through every mistake to reach him. He leaned back in the chair, eyes closing for a moment. The sound of the wall clock filled the room, slow, certain, alive. He reached for the old watch on the table, the one that had measured 3 generations of apologies and beginnings, and placed Ethan's note beneath it. Outside, the afternoon light turned the sky the color of brass. The ticking blended with the faint murmur of ocean wind that had somehow found its way inland. He finally became his own man, Robert whispered. He smiled, not wide, not triumphant, just the quiet satisfaction of something long overdue. The clock ticked again. The sound folded into the air, into the years, into everything that mattered. When a man means it, time gives him back his name. If this story touched you, take a breath, leave a comment, and share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Time, after all, is the only thing we can't borrow. If this story touched something in you, take a moment before you scroll away. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe for more stories that echo long after they end. Because voices fade, but guilt, forgiveness, and love always echo louder.